guys, and welcome to another episode of the Crochet Cakes podcast. My name is Claire Smith, and this is a podcast all about crochet and my crafty endeavors. In today's episode, I want to chat to you guys about inspiration. What inspires me? What's the story behind the colors I've chosen, the projects I'm designing, and just things like that. Little tips and tricks to help you stay inspired as well. But before we begin all that juicy content, I do have to say that I have received notice from the winners of our summer romance cal, so I'm very excited. I have not sent that out to you today yet. I apologize. I was going to go out and send it in the middle of the week, but since we're having several disturbances in the atmosphere, some storms and hurricanes and whatnot, I thought it'd be safer to just wait until the first one passes by and see what the status is, so that your packages will get to you undisturbed, because one of them is going all the way to Russia, so I'm kind of nervous about sending something so far away. And also, 100% honest here, leaving my house to, people and be out there in the environment, it just takes me a little bit. In fact, I went grocery shopping this morning and but I just wanted to get that out there because I was very excited to pick the winners, and even more exciting just to see the amount of projects that you guys worked on for the summer romance cal. Even if you didn't finish, it doesn't really matter. I'm happy that you participated, and I want to thank you for that support. So yes, welcome, and just hope you've had a good crafty week. Now, you may notice, if you follow me on Instagram, that I am wearing an item that I faffed a lot about with. And this item is actually what inspired today's inspiration talk, shall we say. But more on that a little bit later in the podcast. First, I just want to generally talk to you guys about how I stay inspired and what inspires me. So, when I first started designing, a lot of people whose podcasts I would watch or whose Instagram feed I followed or things like that, they always just said, do what inspires you. And maybe I'm a little bit obtuse, but my question was always, well, what inspires me? How do I know when something inspires me? How do I know I want to work on this? What? How? When? It's basically all the questions I had rolling around in my head until I sat down and I started thinking about content creation. And by the way, Skillshare has some really good workshops and classes that work on content creation and all that. I'm not sponsored by them, but I did sign up with them, and I have been at least trying to set 1 hour aside a day to dedicate to growing my business, be it marketing wise, be it content wise, all that juicy stuff. So anyway, content creation. One of the things that I learned in this lesson, and I realized I wasn't really applying when it came to designing, was the 5 things you want people to know, or that people associate with you, or the thing that associate with your brand. So for me, coming up with 4 was really easy because crochet cakes, the name behind it was I love to crochet and I love to bake and eat cake. So yeah, so crochet, baking, reading. I am a huge reader at the moment, mostly of fan fiction, but I'm a huge reader. And I tend to be very nerdy. There are certain fandoms I like and just that drive me, and I could read about them all day. And if you're interested a little bit in this sort of fandomy nerdy thing, then you should watch the questions I answered in the Stitchcraft and Wizardry podcast. I think they were really fun to answer, and it was a blast. So you can check that out. I'll link it in the little iCards somewhere around here. I think it's going to be here. And if you're interested in watching their answers, you can of course watch the previous video to this one, which is called Laugh With Us, that I'll also link up here for you guys. So what I've already said, crochet, baking, and reading nerdy stuff, and history. If you don't know, my bachelor's is in history and my master's is in museum studies, so it's all very historical, cultural related. And I know that, definitely guys, I know that history it's mean, it can be gross, and it's very frustrating, and it kind of turns you into a cynic because you think, you know, reading about humans reading about humans BC, reading about humans AD, living with humans now, nothing's changed. At least it feels that way, you know? It feels like we're still fighting the same injustices and just looking for equal treatment for everybody. But I am still a huge history nerd, I know. So once I kind of wrote down these 5 things, it made it easier for me to have places to pull from when I'm a bit stuck as to what I want to create. And recently, having discovered this whole costuming drama world where people dress historically because it's what they love and how they want to dress, has also reinvigorated or maybe reignited my passion for history and what people before me used to wear. And going on with that, the vintage secondhand world is also a huge inspiration for me. So these are the places I draw inspiration from. And you might just think, okay, fantastic, you're inspired by Queen Elizabeth I. How do you translate that into a design? That's the hard part. I'm not gonna lie, that's the hard part. But what I try to do is look up images, portraiture, read about the culture of the Elizabethan era, read the poetry, and try to find a flow in the words and the customs that can maybe inspire a design, or that bring something to mind that I think I can translate into crochet. Another way I do that is by reading stitch dictionaries. I think I have a total of 4 or 5 crochet stitch dictionaries. And sometimes if I have an idea in my head, like let's say Queen Elizabeth I, I'll write it in a notebook, Queen Elizabeth I. Everything that comes to mind of when I think of Queen Elizabeth I. Shakespeare, red, she had red hair. Collars, big collars, the really pointed waist. So I write down all those things that come to my head when I think about Queen Elizabeth I. And then I go browsing through my stitch dictionaries and I'm like, okay, which of these stitches could kind of help bring about a design? When I find one I like, I will proceed to do a gauge swatch. And sometimes I don't. Sometimes after seeing the design, it just all comes together. After seeing the stitch, it just all comes together in my head and I will just go on with the design. Another thing that I like to do is watch different craft podcasts or follow different Instagram accounts that don't have to deal with crochet. That really helps kick my inspiration because you'll learn about how people in different crafty areas follow a process, what their creative process is, and you might pull ideas from that. For example, the idea of writing down the name that inspires me and then everything that comes to mind when I think about that name actually came out from doing a lettering workshop on Skillshare. So there's just so many places these days that we can nurture our creative side that I find really inspiring, honestly. So have having told you all about the historical dress and keeping on with the theme of history, that is what inspired the top I'm wearing, of which you can only see the collar. So I will stand up. Okay, I'm standing up. All right, so what I'm wearing is an ancient Egyptian inspired top. If you have been with me for a while, you may have heard me say before that ancient Egypt was actually what inspired my love of history, and it all started with a very non-historical movie, The Mummy. The Mummy to this day is still one of my favorite films. I love watching it, and when I worked in a library, I sent all my friends a gif of Evie saying, "I am a librarian," because that was one of the best things of working in a library. But back to this design. The design features a collar, then it goes down and has a V-neck opening. It has a contrasting collar band right below the breasts, and at the bottom it continues on with the main color, which is a blue. It's a type of gray blue, it's a muted blue, and the contrasting band is a color that kind of looks like sandy oatmeal. Now, the stitch that I use is a combination of crossed double crochets and single crochets. And I will give you the background of all of this right now. Essentially, when I sat down to think about ancient Egypt, I started looking at the hieroglyphs. I unfortunately don't have any of the ancient Egyptian encyclopedias that I had during my childhood. I left those at home in Puerto Rico, so I didn't really have them with me to sit down and explore. But the internet, and where in the internet? Museums, guys, museums. So I went to the Louvre Museum, which I know houses a big Egyptian collection, as well as the British Museum and other different museums around the world. And I looked at the the statues and the papyrus they had, and things like the Book of the Dead, which is not as cool or as amazing as The Mummy makes it look. It's still pretty awesome, guys. It's just not a book because bookbinding hadn't been invented back then. But yes, so that's actually in the Louvre. They house these individual pages that make up the Book of the Dead, and you can see their hieroglyphs. And I also read some articles in the museums. One of them is from the Louvre as well, about the linen shifts that they found. And I also found a book, which I will link down below. And all of this information will also be in the description of and the inspiration behind the design when I actually write up my blog post and feature the design, which I'm thinking it'll be October, because if this reminds you of ancient Egyptian like it does me, I don't see why you couldn't crochet it up and maybe even finish it so you get a real tunic out of it and you can wear it as a costume if you would like. There is no rule that says you can't. So that's why I'm thinking about releasing this in October. Now, when you read and look at the hieroglyphs and look at the designs, paintings in the wall and all these things, you will find a lot of them have really tight clothes, and they don't seem to have any seams, and if they're nobility, they have a collar. So having the basis of this collar, I needed it, okay? I needed my design to have a collar. And then looking for actual surviving pieces of Egyptian jewelry or Egyptian clothes, I came across a very popular ancient Egyptian piece and it was the beaded dress. Once I saw this beaded dress, I knew that I could make something that would look like it with crossed stitches, because I will put a picture that's not copyrighted here about the beaded dress. And what you're going to be seeing is a V-neck front with a bottom band right below the breast that probably connected all the way around, but there doesn't seem to be any back to this top, and to this dress, and it also features a huge jeweled collar. Now, I didn't have any beads. I don't have any beads to use here, or anything, seed beads that I could have ordered. And so I will probably add beads to this collar after the fact, but I love it. Sorry, I had to say that. I love this design. So combining the crossed stitches and the V shape that I knew had to be present, because the beaded dress is not the only dress that features this V neck shaping. And let me tell you, when I read the book on ancient Egyptian fashion, of course, there were some predominant features all throughout the Egyptian fashion up until you get to Cleopatra, which was Greek, really not ancient Egyptian, so the fashions change. But the collar and the V-neck were just very prominent throughout this time. So I knew I needed those pieces to be part of my design. And so even though I'm not very comfortable with a big V-neck, I think overall the aesthetic is very pretty, and I feel confident that I managed to create something that you can tell was inspired by this beaded dress. And it's also very appropriate for summer and heat. The other thing that I really considered in this design was not only what stitch I would use, the colors and the fabric I would use were also a big thing. So in ancient Egypt, linen was the fabric that they would use, and the more sheer the linen, the more high quality the linen was. And I'm talking see-through, okay? The more see-through it was, the better quality you had. So I knew I wanted a linen yarn, and I chose a cotton linen yarn blend, and this is, I'll link it down below, but it's Premier. It's in their Universal Yarns collection. They have this cotton linen blend, which is, I would say, a little bit of a heavy fingering weight, but still light enough to potentially emulate the idea of a lightweight garment, of a sheer garment. And the colors behind it I chose because when you think of ancient Egypt, or at least when I think of ancient Egypt, one of the first things that come to mind is the Nile. The Nile was life. So I wanted to choose a color that would represent the color of the Nile, and the contrasting color, of course, when you think about Egypt nowadays, you think about sand. So I wanted my contrasting color to kind of resemble that, sand. So we have the Nile and we have the sand. And so that was the whole inspiration behind this ancient Egyptian design. So when I'm not designing and I choose items to crochet, I love reading the inspiration behind them. What was the designer thinking? How did it come about? And so many of the projects that I choose do have that little bit of interesting story behind them. And I'm currently working on a crochet pattern that was designed by Sandra of Nomad Stitches, and one of the reasons I chose it wasn't only because I would be learning a new technique, as it uses mosaic crochet, single row mosaic crochet in the round, which I've never done any type of mosaic crochet, so it was an opportunity to learn. But the story behind it, it's a place, it was inspired by the Turkish baths in Spain, which are places that she has visited. And I just loved when she gave that little bit of history behind the design. And coincidentally, this, I guess, can also count as a historical crochet design. So I am a little bit further along than I was last time. I'm not gonna lie, I don't really pick up this project often. This for me is the type of pattern that I have to really just maybe have some gentle background music behind, but just focus on the pattern 100% of the time. And this is what I have to till now. I've completed the Mosaic Chart 1. I'm working on the second Mosaic Chart, and I've done 2 dividers. The pattern is worked bottom up, and you need 3 colors total. So you need your main color, which for me, I chose it to be this ivory sandy white, which is a Knit Picks yarn, and it's their fingering weight cotton acrylic. And then for the mosaic section, I chose colors that I'm not entirely happy with. I love the colors. I just don't think they work well together in the mosaic. But I was too lazy to rip it all back, so I kept going. And I'm using a variegated yarn, which I don't really love variegated yarns. I don't tend to use them a lot. I don't tend to buy them a lot. I do have a lot of them in my stash though, because when I first started collecting indie dyed yarn, I didn't know any better. Now I do. So this is a variegated yarn, and it's got blues, greens, oranges, browns. It's a very autumnal colorway, and I forgot who is dyed by. I do know it's BFL Silk Blend, and it has a very high twist, and it's much plumper than the contrasting yarn, which is the gold, that is Coop Knits, if I'm not mistaken, and it's just a 75-25 superwash merino nylon. So as I said, I'm working my way through this second chart, and that is another reason why I have to just be super concentrated when I'm doing this. Working from a chart, it's not that it's hard. I can fully understand why you wouldn't want to write out the instructions, but it makes it harder for me to not visualize, memorize the repeats of what I'm doing. So I constantly have to refer back to the pattern, and this is one project that I cannot stop mid-row. If I stop mid-row, I will not know how to continue, or what row I left off, or what part of the chart I'm in, so I have to complete every row. And I think I do, when I work on it, about 1 or 2 rows, but it's been, having said all that, it's still really fun learning a new technique and watching how different people use the same technique to create so many different designs is something really interesting as well. So yeah, oh, let me tell you, let me bring it back up. So I had gauge when I did this. I did 2 gauge swatches. I did 1 flat for the main part of the body at the top, and then I did the mosaic swatch that was worked in the round. And I had gauge. My gauge was not, it was spot on, which I was very, very surprised about. But this is gonna be huge. It was, I didn't feel I was gonna like the fit of it. I didn't want it to be too tight, so I didn't go for the extra small. But what I have done is that I ripped it back to, so that's another reason why I'm not further along. I had already started about halfway through the second chart, and when I realized it was just gonna be too big for me. So I ripped it all back down to the first chart, and I switched to a 4mm hook, which is what you're supposed to use for the main part of the body, but I just decided to use it for everything, just to make my life a little bit simpler. And that lovely project is living in this gorgeous mustard bag, which is by Betsy Makes. That she made it for a bee cow. I don't know, I've had it for a little bit. And in terms of inspiration as well, this is one that has more to do with colors. So I am working on a Christmas gift, and it is a knit gift. And it is the Prairie Socks by Kay Jones. And not only do I like the name Prairie Socks because it reminds me of Little House on the Prairie, which I think was a show Mom watched when she was young, which is fitting because this is a gift for my mom. So not only is the design inspired by Little House on the Prairie, which is something that my mom probably watched when she was young, but the colorway I have chosen is called Father Christmas, and it was inspired by Victorian Christmas colors. So there is a bit of a history there as well. So this sock, I chose it to represent me as the gifter and Mom as the gift receiver, because Little House on the Prairie and Vintage Christmas. So working my way through, you may notice that there's no heel flap because I'm being adventurous here and I am deciding to do an afterthought heel. And I'm also working at magic loop, which is not my preferred method. Problems with this? A lot. So I don't really enjoy working magic loop for one, even with chiagus, which are my favorite knitting needles for socks. And I just love chiagus. Their cable is now floppy, but I'll forgive them. Anyway, so my mom was saying that my gauge has loosened, and it has. My gauge has loosened, so a 64 stitch sock will actually fit my husband, not me. I need to work my socks 60 stitches or 56 stitches. Now I usually work them circular, so I'm much more confident and I don't tend to strangle my yarn when I'm working circular. So they fit. I know a 56 stitch sock in circulars will fit me and Mom. A 56 stitch sock magic loop, I'm thinking might be a bit too tight. Because when I put the stitches onto the cable to try them on, boy was this not stretching a lot, so I'm a bit scared. I do have fatter feet than my mom. Not longer, just fatter, so maybe they'll fit her well. And if not, then I know that I need to do 56 stitches on circular needles and not on magic loop. But I'm learning a lot of new things from this sock, namely that afterthought heels sound nice, but it gets to a point where you think, where am I in this sock if I'm just knitting a tube? And that is also living in a Betsy Makes bag. It's a Christmas sock bag, which I absolutely love. It's just got natural colored linen in the background, and it's got little cutouts of Christmas trees and Christmas presents, and it's got a jingle, which isn't that just perfect. So the other thing I wanted to share with you is how I organize my inspiration, because you know, in Pinterest it's easy. You create a board and you have it all there. But if you're like me and you also like doing things touchy-feely, old-fashioned, then you want to write stuff down. So what I've done is I have 3 notebooks here with me. Well, actually 4. One's my podcasting notebook. But one is my vlogging notebook, and this is coincidentally open on the page for the 60s bobble dress, which is another vintage inspired design. This one was inspired by the 60s, and I will be publishing that in September. So if you've been waiting for this dress, then here's your chance. But I will usually write down by month what ideas have I had that month of things that I can work in. And I don't always work them. So for example, in April, I wrote down some ideas that had to do with a skirt in moss stitch, a comfortable sweater with a picot ridge, a full moon crochet top, and some wide crochet belts. So I will just write down whatever comes to my head, and I may not work it that year or month, but it's here in my notebook, and I'll usually put a tab that says inspiration on it or ideas, so that I know that those were the ideas, because here I also write the initial pattern. I keep it all on paper. But more artistically, if you will, I also have a notebook where I put magazine cutouts of things that I really like. So there's not much thought behind this. I just literally, whatever thing I like, I cut it out and I glue it. So we have architecture, colors, portraits, wallpaper. It's just all here. And whenever I'm feeling particularly stuck in terms of choosing colors or what colors will go well together, I just go back to this notebook and I add to it whenever I have a new magazine. I had a friend that for some reason had a whole bunch of subscription magazines, and I mean, for some reason he was receiving home goods and home garden magazines, and he's like, just texted, do you want them? I'm like, yes. So I'm currently reading my way through those, and whatever thing catches my eye, I put here. Like I said, there's not much thought. This is really it caught my eye. I'm not going to question why it caught my eye, and I just put it in this notebook. And that has also really helped me realize what colors I prefer, because as you saw at the notebook, there's a lot of yellows, greens, and blues. So those are colors I tend to lean more towards too. And there's also a lot of combinations of blacks with pops of color, because that's also something I lean towards. And the last one is my planner. So this is kind of a journal planner, and it's not really a bullet journal because I'm not doing things that are that pretty. But this helps with my content creation, because I will write down what goals I have for that month. I'll leave spaces for new ideas as well. And as you see, I've organized when do I pin, when do I post on Instagram, just trying to keep all on board now that this is my job for the foreseeable future, until my bank account says I cannot take you being this broke. So I'm just working my way through that. That's another great way. And I feel that having this planner that I've made myself is great, because I decide how much space I have, and I have a section for a weekly wrap-up, because once the week is done, I'll write down everything that happened during that week. What did I start, projects I start, did I find a new recipe that I really liked, and then I can share that with you in the podcast. So this is just another way of organizing my content and staying on top of things now that I really want to move forward in this crafty world. So those are some of the things that I am working on crochet-wise, design-wise. I put a little bit of a pause on the designs just because this Egyptian top took a lot out of me. There was a lot of upset with this top and trying to figure out why this will work, why this might work, and just adjusting a lot of things, which was really fun and frustrating at the same time, because you kind of forget that things aren't always as easy as you may think they are. They're gonna ask a lot of you, but in the end, you will have something that you enjoy. And this project also caused me a lot of doubt, because this style, if you've been with me for a while, it's not something I usually wear. Not the collar. Guys, I'm all about the collars. I love I love collars on a shirt. Sometimes when I'm gonna make a garment, I just look, what collar does it have? But because of the V-neck and showing my cleavage, I'm used to having everything covered. Not because I'm ashamed of my body or anything. I mean, we all deal with bodily issues, but that's stuff for another episode. But because I don't feel this is really me. So I struggled with that, because this was something that I was really inspired to design. I love ancient Egypt, and I wanted something wearable that reminded me of ancient Egypt. But would I use it? And after, I have to say, a week of looking at this top, trying it on and everything, I decided that yes, I would use it. It's not something that I would always lean towards. It's not something I would automatically pick if I'm going somewhere, but if I were going to a beach or on a hike or something very outdoorsy where I also want to be comfortable and breezy, yes, I would wear this because I love the fabric that the cotton linen yarn created. I love the stitch and I love the collar. I'm just a little bit uncomfortable with the cleavage, but I'm pushing my own boundaries, and I think that's something very important. We shouldn't always be comfortable. We should embrace being uncomfortable and explore and rationalize why we feel that way. But anyway, I hope that this episode served as some inspiration with you. I hope that you are well and that you continue to be well. And I most of all hope that I was able to bring a little bit of happiness to your Monday. And I will see you guys not in 2 weeks time actually, because I'm recording some little tutorials. One of them is already up and it was the flower stitch tutorial, which was very requested, so that one is up on my channel in English and Spanish. And then next up is the construction behind the flower duster. So as always, I will leave all the links you need to anything down below. Please comment, like, and subscribe. Most of all, comment, please. I love actually chatting and interacting with you guys. And just, you know, follow me wherever you want to follow me. And like I said, all the links will be in the description box below. So I hope you guys have a very fun, crafty week. And I will see you later on with my crochet tutorial. And then in 2 weeks time with another podcast. Bye!